Hola estudiantes! By popular demand, I am here to talk to you today about Camilo José Cela and a little bit at the end about Ana Maria Matute. I'm going to talk to you about Camilo José Cela, not about the story in the textbook today, but about his novel La Familia de Pascual Duarte, which begins a literary movement known as Tremendismo, which I want you to think about in respect to this story in the book. La Familia de Pascual Duarte is a first-person narrated account of a man's life starting in his childhood. The guy, of course, is Pascual Duarte. He's a terrible, terrible childhood. His father dies a couple days before he's born of a rabid dog bite. He has a sister who's considerably older than he is, who is just the light of his life and he loves very much. And then he ends up having a younger brother who has developmental disorders that can't even walk. And so because he's crawling around on the floor, the pigs eat his ears off. So the family just basically just leaves him alone. They don't even want to look at him. And he screams every time he sees pigs because he's totally traumatized by pigs, understandably. And this dude, kicks him in the head one day and his ears start bleeding and everyone laughs. This is incredibly grotesque. And eventually the little boy is drowned in a vat of oil, presumably by the guy who's, the kid's father. The mother has all kinds of different partners that abuse the children, and she's an alcoholic. And eventually, the older sister, has to leave the house and work as a prostitute to help support the family. So this beginning, Pascual blames his mother for all of this, and he actively hates her. He ends up getting married to this woman. He's very happy during their honeymoon, and she gets pregnant during their honeymoon. But when they come back, the day they come back, she falls off her horse and miscarries the baby. So in vengeance, Pascual Duarte stabs the horse with his knife and kills it. And then a little while later, he sees a dog that's looking at him funny and he shoots it repeatedly. So Pascual is becoming more and more unhinged by his own hatred, and he's just a bad dude, right? Increasingly. He ends up abandoning his wife and mother and goes away for a long time and then comes back. And when he comes back, his wife is pregnant by this pimp who is the pimp of his, abandoned wife who has to support the family and his sister. And he gets so mad that this guy has slept with his wife and also that he's treated his sister so badly all these years, he ends up killing the guy and he goes to jail. When he gets out, he ends up marrying this woman who's the niece of a local witch, and because of their relationship, long story short, he ends up killing a local nobleman, and that's the thing that sends him to prison for the rest of his life. Essentially, he's executed in 1937. What's interesting about the end of this story is that he narrates his own death. So it says, I was hanged at blah blah blah, and you're kind of wondering who's writing that. At the beginning, there's a little part of a guy who says that he found these texts, and he wants everybody to remember to do exactly the opposite of what Pascual Duarte does because he's a terrible, terrible person. And this novel, then, is the first example of this literary movement called Tremendismo. And I'm going to point you to your textbooks. On page 591, we have at the bottom of the page the definition. It says, se considera una variante grotesca y expresionista del neonaturalismo. And it says the characteristics on the next page incluyen la sordidez, la enfermedad, la violencia y personajes repulsivos de la clase baja. Ellos se combinan con técnicas expresionistas como la deformación, la caricatura y la exageración. So in that way, you can see how Pascual Duarte is talking about this rural, very poor life full of people who are just reprehensible people who treat each other terribly all the time. And this all results because of their extreme poverty and the situations that they find themselves in extreme violence and violence to society, really, that sort of upends the natural, quote-unquote, order of things. And I wanted to point that out because Pascual Duarte is written on the model of Lazarillo de Tormes, right? It's a picaresque novel, essentially. In Lazarillo, of course, he starts with his childhood, and we find out how terrible his childhood was and how everybody mistreated him his whole life. And he committed crimes too. But the difference between Lazarillo de Tormes and Pascual Duarte is Lazarillo de Tormes only committed crimes in order to survive. He stole things from people because he was starving, or he would starve otherwise. Whereas Pascual Duarte just kills people because he wants to, and because, a dog looked at him funny or whatever. And so they're making this connection between the lower classes and the extreme poverty and the situations that they find themselves in, whereas Lazarillo feels that this is justification for his actions. Pascual also believes that his terrible situations are justifications for his actions, but because we as readers of Spanish literature know Lazarillo de Tormes, we see that this is a grotesque parody of everything that Lazarillo is talking about and stands for. And this is reproduced right down to the level of the style that they speak in, right? Remember how Lazarillo speaks in this really erudite, educated way, even though he's from probably an illiterate class. Pascual Duarte also does the same thing. And so we have basically people living in this world of unnecessary cruelty. About the Matute story, just in a very brief way, I want to point out that the main character in the Matute story is named Dionisio. Dionisio, of course, is the Greek god of wine, pleasure, for festivity, madness, vegetation, plenty. And I don't know if you know this, but his mother, when she's pregnant with him, of course it's Zeus's kid, because everyone is Zeus's kid. His mother's pregnant with him. She ends up dying. It's a long story how, but because she's pregnant, Zeus takes the fetus out of her uterus and sews it up in his thigh, and Zeus actually carries the baby to term. And we can see that that's really similar to what happens with Ezekiel, who takes this child from his wife's village, whose mother can't support him, and he basically adopts the son and raises him until the maturity that will allow him to be an adult, at least, which is where that story ends. And I want you to think a little bit about the connection between those two things. And I also want to point out the connection between the physical location of the store. If I could find... Yes. So at the beginning of the story, on page 597, it describes the town. It describes where the chabolas, where all the people live. They talks about where the marineros live, talks about where the rich people live, right? And the church. And it says in lines 7, 8, La tienda de comestibles se abría justamente en el centro de aquel mundo. And I really want to, and it goes on to describe that a little bit more, but I really want to highlight to you the fact that when Ezekiel is talking to Dionisio about the concept of fiar and who you give credit to and who you don't. When we're talking about los de la tienda, the store is not just in the center of everything physically, but also in social class. There are people above them who are wealthy, and there are people below them who are poor. And they have what everybody needs. And so to a certain extent, they're the purveyors. They're the ones who control what people can get, right? But in another sense, they're in the center in the bad way too, because people in the middle, right? These people in the middle are kind of a fulcrum point, but they can also be crushed between groups. When the people who are very poor need something, if it ever comes to that, they're going to come and get it. If they're starving, they're going to come and get it by force. Or if the people who are wealthy need something and the people from the store don't want to give it to them, they can always become stuck in the middle. So they're in a precarious position, but they're also in a privileged position with respect to the other people. And that's why it's important to note que están en el centro de todo, ¿vale? Thank you very much for watching.